Thanks a lot for this question, and I get asked it a lot, and it is an absolutely valid question to have, so don't let anybody make you feel guilty about it, as there are loads of misconceptions about this particular subject. How were the books of the Bible chosen and deemed divinely inspired? And it is a completely fair question, and it's easy to default to the answer, well, God picked them, so they're divinely inspired. But in reality, that's kind of a cop-out, especially when you learn that what's considered divinely inspired is different between different Christian faiths. So the collection of books that make up the Bible are called canon. And the canon of the Protestant Bible is 66 books, 39 in the Old Testament and 27 in the New Testament. The canon of the Catholic Bible is 73 books, 46 in the Old Testament and 27 in the New Testament. And the biblical canon of Greek and Russian Orthodox Christian faiths are 79 books, 52 Old Testament books, and 27 New Testament books. And there are also other Christian faiths, such as the Ethiopian Orthodox faith, which recognizes 81 books, 54 Old Testament, and 27 New Testament. And that's a whole different thing. So what do we take from that? Number one, what's considered divinely inspired completely depends on your faith tradition. And number two, this is why you see all these goofy and misinformed conspiracy videos on social media of people trying to stoke fear and thus clicks by putting out videos like, and then these books were removed. What are they trying to hide from us? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, those videos really aren't worth your time, as all they do is pump you full of bad information. So how did faith traditions decide on what's divinely inspired canon and what's not? Well, since there are a bunch of people who are new to my channel, I'm going to repost 2 videos about this subject, namely one about how the books of the New Testament were chosen and some historical background on the Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament, which was actually the version of the Old Testament referenced by the writers of the New Testament. Hopefully these videos answer some questions for you, and God bless. This is a great question, which I don't think people ask enough. The selection of the Bible's books is fascinating. I teach a course on this if you want more detail, but here are the basics. And for this video, I'm going to focus on the New Testament because the Old Testament is way more complicated, so we'll save that for later. So let's get it out of the way. Some say Constantine chose the books of the Bible at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. But this crap conspiracy has been around for a long while in many different forms, and we can thank the Da Vinci Code for this conspiracy theory's modern resuscitation. But that book ripped off a book from 1982 called Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which was long on conspiracy theory and very short on evidence, which was based on a bunch of whacked out conspiracy theories, and basically it's a book that kind of looked like this. And then there's Voltaire, yes, the Voltaire, who in the 18th century popularized a legend that the Bible was canonized in Nicaea by the bishops placing all of the known biblical books on a table, saying a prayer, and seeing which illegitimate text fell to the floor. And none of that is close to being true, and I got plenty of videos about that. But the actual process of selecting the New Testament's books took place over a very long time. And there are letters in church histories that have survived from the early church fathers that prove this. And during the late 1st through 4th centuries, church theologians, they started debating which of the many books and gospels floating around were legit and which were spurious. And the use of the word books is wonky here, as books as we think of them today are way different from then. Printing press didn't exist until 1440. So what we call books were collections of letters, scrolls, parchments, yada yada, and they were assembled into codices. And the earliest fragments of these writings come from the early 2nd century, but late 1st century church fathers were writing about them. So we know a lot of them were around in some form late 1st, early 2nd century. And over time, books that were deemed authoritative by numerous individual church communities that used them came to be included in lists of accepted books. And early church fathers, when faced with something that didn't match up to what they had been taught from those that preceded them, they dropped that heresy bomb and discard them. Interesting note, the first known attempt at a canonical New Testament was the Marcionite canon around 144 AD, which was considered heresy. And I have a video about that, so look it up, because Marcion, well, he had some really interesting ideas. And the Muratorian canon, supposedly written in 170 AD, is another early accepted New Testament list. But in the early 3rd century, Origen had his list of preferred New Testament books, about 21 of them. And then there's this guy, Eusebius, who writing in the early 300s provided an early list of which books were considered legit and which were borderline fugazi. What's neat about Eusebius is that he broke his list into 4 categories: recognized, disputed, spurious, and heretical. Among the recognized were the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts, and Paul's epistles. Under disputed, Eusebius included James and Jude, 2 Peter, 2 John, and 3 John. And downright spurious and heretical, books like Thomas, Barnabas. But the earliest version of the eventual consensus New Testament canon didn't come until 367, when Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria, in his annual Easter letter, composed a list that's still recognized today as the canon of 27 books. And in 393 at the Synod of Hippo was the first time a council of bishops listed and approved a New Testament canon, which was similar to the modern Catholic canon. But the debate over what was canonical and what wasn't didn't stop. It went on for a long time, into the 16th century, when the reformer Martin Luther published his version of the Bible and moved 4 books in the New Testament, James, Hebrews, Jude, and Revelation, to the back of the Bible because he thought that they were questionable. And later, Luther's Tyndale, Geneva Bible, and the Bishop Bible, they would go on to form the basis of the King James Version, but King James Version bringing them back in. So, why did some books make the canonical cut and others didn't? Overall, there were 3 criteria used by church authorities. The first was authorship, whether it was believed to have been written by an apostle, by Paul, or more importantly, someone close to them. Mark, for example, wasn't an apostle, but was believed to be an interpreter for Peter. We know Paul didn't write all the letters attributed to him, so it's believed that they were written by folks citing his authority, etc., etc. Same thing with Peter, yada, yada. The second criterion was antiquity, with older texts taking priority over the newer ones. And the third was orthodoxy, or how well the text conformed to current church teaching. And that last one's a biggie because current church teaching changed a lot over the first few centuries. And we must understand that in those first few centuries, well before the establishment of the official Catholic Church and all that stuff, Christianity changed a lot. I mean, look at how much it's changed over the last 200 years, am I right? But during these first pivotal centuries, there wasn't an overarching organization pulling strings. In these first 300 years, these churches were literally fighting for their day-to-day survival, debating which books would be the guideposts of their faith. As Christians, we like to imagine that God came down with his mighty hand and said, "These are the books of the New Testament." But that's not how it worked at all. These were people arguing and debating, praying and talking about which books had the mightiest of effects, and pulled this New Testament story into a greater whole. The Bible is a collection of people's understanding of holy and divine experiences of God, a multi-vocal book of many different cultures and different times, with its stories written over a period of 1,000 years. It's complex, layered, nuanced, and because of that, it's holy ground. It's where we come together, take off our sandals, and learn from each other's experiences of God. But to run from its real history, or to stick our heads in the sand, or worse, just grab onto silly conspiracy theories, well, that's just ignorant, because this is how the books of the New Testament were selected. Now, was God instrumental in making sure those books were selected? I believe so, absolutely, because the fact that this book is even here is a miracle. But did he stretch forth his hand from heaven and write it himself? No, he didn't. But that doesn't mean it's not inspired, as the meaning of divine inspiration is so much greater than what we've been told. And people perish for lack of knowledge.